What if I told you that some of history's most legendary victories weren't won with swords, shields, or sheer numbers, but with the power of the mind? Long before modern psychology, ancient commanders understood something profound. The battlefield isn't just a physical space, it's a mental one. Take Alexander the Great, for example. Known as one of history's greatest military minds, he didn't just rely on brute force to conquer vast territories. Instead, he mastered the art of deception, planting false information, and using clever tactics to outmaneuver his enemies before a single blow was struck. These strategies weren't just about winning battles, they were about breaking the will of the opposition, sowing doubt, and turning fear into a weapon. It's a lesson that still resonates today, from boardrooms to battlefields, proving that the psychological playbook of ancient warfare is as relevant now as it was thousands of years ago. But Alexander was just one player in a much larger story. Across the ancient world, armies deployed incredible and often terrifying psychological tactics to gain the upper hand. Imagine this: armies marching into battle with flaming torches at night, creating the illusion of an endless force, or leaders spreading rumors of invincibility, leaving their enemies paralyzed with fear before the fight even began. These weren't just random acts of intimidation, they were carefully calculated strategies designed to exploit human psychology, to manipulate perception, and to turn the tide of war without ever drawing a sword. The battlefield was a stage, and these commanders were master directors, orchestrating fear, confusion, and doubt to secure their victories. So how exactly did these ancient armies manipulate the minds of their enemies? What were the secrets behind their most ingenious psychological tactics? In this video, we'll dive deep into 20 extraordinary examples of psychological warfare from ancient history, stories that will leave you in awe of the creativity, cunning, and sheer audacity of these ancient commanders. From the use of sound and light to create chaos, to the power of symbolism and propaganda, we'll explore how these strategies not only shaped the outcomes of battles, but also influenced the course of history. Whether you're a history enthusiast, a student of human behavior, or simply someone who loves a good story, this journey into the minds of ancient warriors promises to be unforgettable. So let's step into the past and uncover the secrets of psychological warfare that changed the world. The story of the Trojan Horse is perhaps the most iconic example of psychological warfare in all of history, a tale that blends myth and reality into a lesson of cunning and deception. After 10 long years of fighting outside the walls of Troy, the Greeks devised a plan so bold, so audacious, that it would change the course of the war. They built an enormous wooden horse, offering it as a supposed gift to the Trojans, a symbol of their surrender and an offering to the gods. But hidden within its hollow belly were Greek soldiers, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The Trojans, believing the war was over and the horse a divine blessing, brought it inside their impenetrable walls. That night, the Greek forces emerged, opening the gates for their army and sealing Troy's fate. But this wasn't just a physical attack, it was a masterstroke of psychological manipulation. The Greeks exploited the Trojans' trust, their belief in divine favor, and their complacency after years of stalemate. The horse wasn't just a weapon, it was a symbol that played on hope, pride, and the human tendency to let down one's guard. It turned the Trojans' own emotions against them, using their desire for peace and their reverence for the gods as tools of their downfall. This wasn't just a trick, it was a profound understanding of human psychology, a lesson in how to weaponize trust. The legacy of the Trojan horse extends far beyond the ancient world. It became a blueprint for strategic deception, inspiring countless military campaigns throughout history. Even today, the term Trojan Horse is used to describe any strategy that disguises a threat as a gift or a gesture of goodwill. Its influence can be seen in everything from espionage tactics to cybersecurity, proving that the principles of psychological warfare are timeless. The story of the Trojan horse reminds us that sometimes the most powerful weapons aren't swords or spears, they're the ideas that shape how we think and act. Hannibal's ambush at Lake Trasimene stands as one of the most brilliant displays of psychological warfare in ancient history, a masterclass in exploiting terrain, timing, and human emotion. After crossing the Alps with his army, Hannibal faced the powerful Roman forces, led by Consul Gaius Flaminius. Knowing the Romans were confident in their superior numbers and discipline, Hannibal devised a plan to turn their overconfidence against them. He chose the narrow, foggy pass along Lake Trasimene as his battleground, a natural trap that would amplify the chaos of an ambush. Under the cover of thick mist, Hannibal concealed his troops along the hillsides, creating a perfect setup for a devastating surprise attack. When the Roman army marched into the pass, they had no warning of the danger lurking above. Hannibal's forces struck suddenly, descending from the high ground and blocking the Romans' escape routes. The fog, combined with the narrow terrain, made it impossible for the Romans to organize or retreat. Panic spread rapidly as soldiers found themselves surrounded, unable to see the enemy or determine the scale of the attack. This wasn't just a physical assault, it was a calculated effort to shatter the Romans' morale, to turn their orderly ranks into a frantic, disorganized mob. The psychological impact of the ambush was profound. Soldiers who had marched confidently into the pass now faced the terror of the unknown, the feeling of being trapped in a nightmare they couldn't escape. Hannibal's tactics exploited the natural human response to fear and confusion, amplifying the chaos until it overwhelmed the Romans' ability to resist. The result was a catastrophic defeat, with thousands of Roman soldiers killed or captured. But more than that, it was a blow to the Roman psyche, a reminder that even the mightiest army could be undone by clever strategy and the skillful use of terrain. Hannibal's victory at Lake Trasimene wasn't just about outsmarting the Romans. It was about understanding how to manipulate their emotions and expectations. He turned their confidence into a weakness, their discipline into a vulnerability. It was a lesson in the power of unpredictability, in how the environment itself could be weaponized to create fear and disarray. This battle remains a timeless example of how psychological warfare can transform the battlefield, proving that sometimes the mind is the most powerful weapon of all. The Celtic warriors were masters of using sound to strike terror into the hearts of their enemies, turning their battle cries into a psychological weapon as effective as any blade. On the battlefield, they unleashed a cacophony of eerie chants, war cries, and rhythmic drumming that seemed otherworldly, almost supernatural to those who heard it. These sounds weren't just random noise, they were carefully crafted to unnerve, to evoke the presence of forces beyond human understanding. The Celts believed that their voices could summon the spirits of the dead, and they used this belief to their advantage, creating an atmosphere of dread that left their opponents paralyzed with fear. Central to this strategy was the figure of the banshee, a mythical creature from Celtic folklore whose wailing cry was said to foretell death. Warriors would mimic these haunting sounds, blending their voices with the clash of weapons and the chaos of battle. To the untrained ear, it was impossible to distinguish between the cries of living men and the supposed wails of the banshee herself. This blurred line between reality and superstition was key. The enemy, already on edge, would begin to question what they were hearing. Was it just the shouts of warriors, or was it something far more sinister? This uncertainty sowed panic, undermining their resolve and making it harder for them to fight effectively. The psychological impact of these sounds was magnified by the cultural beliefs of the time. In the ancient world, where myths and legends were deeply intertwined with daily life, the idea of supernatural forces intervening in battle wasn't just a story, it was a very real possibility. The Celts understood this and they leaned into it. By weaponizing fear and superstition, they turned their enemies' own beliefs against them, creating a mental battlefield where doubt and terror could cripple even the strongest armies. This tactic wasn't just about the noise itself, it was about the atmosphere it created. The eerie chants and war cries transformed the battlefield into a place of foreboding, where every sound seemed to carry a message of doom. The Celts didn't just fight with swords and shields, they fought with the power of suggestion, the weight of tradition, and the fear of the unknown. Their strategy reminds us that in warfare, sometimes the most devastating weapons are the ones that target the mind. Genghis Khan was a master strategist who understood the power of deception and psychology on the battlefield, and his use of feigned retreats stands as one of history's most effective tactics. At first glance, it seemed like a simple maneuver. His forces would appear to flee, drawing their opponents into pursuit, but this was no act of desperation. It was a carefully calculated trap, designed to exploit the arrogance and impatience of enemy commanders. Many leaders of the time, confident in their superior numbers or strength, would see the retreat as a sign of weakness and charge forward, eager to claim victory. Little did they know they were walking straight into an ambush. The brilliance of this tactic lay in its psychological impact. Chasing a retreating enemy gave the illusion of control, but as the pursuing army pressed forward, they often strayed from their formations, stretching their lines thin. This created chaos and confusion, making them vulnerable. Meanwhile, Genghis Khan's forces, disciplined and prepared, would regroup in hidden positions, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. When the ambush was sprung, the enemy found themselves surrounded, disoriented, and overwhelmed, a devastating blow to their morale. This strategy also played on the emotions of the pursuers. The initial excitement of chasing a seemingly defeated foe turned to frustration as the retreating forces stayed just out of reach. Then, as exhaustion set in and the ambush unfolded, that frustration gave way to fear and panic. The psychological toll was immense. Soldiers who had moments before felt victorious now faced the grim reality of being trapped and outmaneuvered. It was a stark reminder that in warfare, appearances can be deceiving. Genghis Khan's feigned retreats were more than just a clever trick. They were a testament to his understanding of human nature. He knew that overconfidence could be as dangerous as any weapon, and he used it to his advantage. By luring his enemies into false security, he turned their strengths into weaknesses, proving that patience and deception could outlast brute force. This tactic not only secured victories on the battlefield, but also cemented his reputation as a leader who could outthink as well as outfight his opponents. Scipio Africanus, one of Rome's most brilliant military minds, understood that victory on the battlefield often began long before the first clash of swords. His campaign against Carthage during the Second Punic War showcased a masterful use of psychological tactics, specifically the power of whispers. Scipio realized that sowing doubt and confusion within the enemy ranks could be just as effective as any physical assault. To achieve this, he employed a network of spies and defectors, carefully chosen to infiltrate Carthaginian camps and spread carefully crafted rumors. These whispers weren't random, they were targeted, designed to exploit existing tensions and amplify mistrust among Carthaginian leaders and soldiers alike. One of Scipio's key strategies was to spread false information about Carthage's alliances and resources. Rumors began to circulate that their allies were abandoning them, that supplies were running dangerously low, and that their leaders were secretly negotiating with Rome. These stories, though fabricated, struck a nerve. Trust within the Carthaginian army began to erode as soldiers questioned the loyalty of their commanders and the viability of their cause. Uncertainty bred fear, and fear weakened their resolve. Scipio's whispering campaign didn't just plant seeds of doubt, it nurtured a full-blown crisis of confidence. The psychological impact of this strategy was profound. An army thrives on unity and trust, but Scipio's tactics turned those strengths into vulnerabilities. Soldiers who once fought with conviction now hesitated, unsure of who or what to believe. Commanders, distracted by internal suspicions, struggled to maintain order and focus. This internal chaos made it nearly impossible for Carthage to mount a cohesive defense when Scipio's forces finally launched their attack. The uncertainty he had cultivated became a weapon in itself, one that undermined morale and fractured the enemy's ability to respond effectively. Scipio's use of misinformation highlights the timeless nature of psychological warfare. In an era long before modern propaganda techniques, he demonstrated how the spread of doubt could destabilize even the most formidable opponents. His success reminds us that battles are not won by strength alone sometimes. The most decisive victories come from outthinking the enemy. By turning whispers into weapons, Scipio Africanus proved that the mind could be the ultimate battlefield. Zhang, the legendary Chinese warlord, was a master of deception, and his tactics often defied conventional wisdom. One of his most daring strategies involved what became known as the Ghost Army, a psychological ploy designed to bewilder and intimidate his enemies. During a critical battle, Zhang made the seemingly reckless decision to set fire to his own supplies. To an outsider, this act might have appeared desperate, even suicidal. But Zhang move was anything but impulsive. It was a carefully calculated stroke of psychological warfare. By burning his own resources, he created an illusion of despair, a facade that forced his opponents to question his true intentions. The psychological impact of this act was immediate and profound. Opposing generals, witnessing the flames and smoke, assumed Zhang army was on the brink of collapse. This assumption led them to lower their guard, believing victory was already within their grasp. But Zhang forces were far from defeated. In fact, the burning of supplies was a ruse to conceal his true strength. By appearing weaker than he actually was, Zhang lured his enemies into a false sense of security. When the time was right, he launched a devastating counterattack, catching his opponents completely off guard. This strategy underscores the power of unpredictability in warfare. Zhang understood that the element of surprise could be a formidable weapon, capable of shattering an enemy's confidence and disrupting their plans. His unconventional approach forced his opponents to second-guess their own strategies, creating confusion and hesitation at the worst possible moment. In battle, hesitation can be fatal, and Zhang actions exploited this truth to devastating effect. The story of the Ghost Army also highlights the importance of perception in combat. Zhang decision to destroy his own supplies was not just a physical act, it was a psychological gambit, designed to alter the way his enemies saw the battlefield. By controlling the narrative, he turned what appeared to be a disadvantage into a source of strength. This tactic reminds us that warfare is as much a game of the mind as it is of might. Zhang legacy endures as a testament to the enduring power of cunning and creativity in the face of overwhelming odds. The Siege of Jerusalem stands as one of the most harrowing examples of psychological warfare in ancient history. As Roman forces closed in on the city in the year 70, they employed tactics designed not just to conquer, but to crush the will of the defenders. One of their most chilling methods was the public crucifixion of captured rebels. These executions were not merely punishments, they were spectacles, visible to all within the city walls. The sight of hundreds of crosses lining the horizon served as a grim reminder of Roman dominance and the futility of resistance. Each crucified body was a message: surrender or face the same fate. Roman commanders understood that fear could be as effective as any sword or shield. By making their presence felt in such a visceral way, they sought to undermine the morale of Jerusalem's defenders. The psychological toll was immense. Imagine being a soldier or a civilian within the city, witnessing the relentless display of brutality. The sense of dread would have been overwhelming, eroding the resolve to fight and sowing doubt in the possibility of victory. This tactic was not just about inflicting physical harm, it was about breaking the spirit of an entire population. The Romans also employed other forms of psychological pressure. They orchestrated blockades to cut off supplies, creating a sense of isolation and desperation. Siege engines were positioned within view of the city, their imposing structures a constant reminder of the impending assault. The combination of starvation, fear, and the looming threat of attack created a perfect storm of psychological warfare. The goal was clear: to force surrender without the need for prolonged and costly combat. The long-term effects of these tactics were profound. Fear and intimidation became tools of Roman imperial strategy, shaping the way they approached future conflicts. The story of Jerusalem serves as a stark reminder of the power of psychological dominance in warfare. It shows that battles are not always won through sheer force alone. Sometimes, the mind is the most decisive battlefield. The legacy of the siege of Jerusalem endures as a testament to the chilling efficiency of terror as a weapon. The Persian Empire turned to a weapon that combined sheer size with psychological terror: the war elephant. These towering creatures, often adorned with armor and carrying soldiers on their backs, were unlike anything their enemies had ever encountered. For armies unfamiliar with elephants, the sight of these massive animals charging across the battlefield was enough to sow panic. Imagine standing in formation, shield in hand, only to see an elephant larger than any beast you've ever known thundering toward you. The ground shakes, the air fills with their trumpeting calls, and fear takes hold long before the first clash. Elephants were more than just physical threats. They were instruments of psychological warfare. Their size and strength shattered enemy formations, creating chaos that was hard to recover from. Soldiers who had trained to face human opponents found themselves unprepared for such an overwhelming force. The chaos elephants caused wasn't just tactical, it was mental. The very presence of these animals could break the resolve of even the most disciplined troops. Fear of the unknown, coupled with the spectacle of their power, made the elephant a devastating tool for the Persians. Beyond their raw physical impact, elephants also served as symbols of imperial might. Riding these majestic creatures into battle conveyed a message of dominance and superiority. It wasn't just about winning the fight, it was about demoralizing the enemy before the fight even began. The psychological edge they provided often proved as valuable as their ability to trample and disrupt. This use of intimidation through unfamiliarity stands as a testament to the ingenuity of ancient warfare. The Persians understood that battles could be won not just with swords and arrows, but by striking fear into the hearts of their foes. The Vikings mastered the art of using darkness as a weapon. Their night raids weren't just about physical destruction, they were psychological operations designed to paralyze their enemies with fear. Under the cover of night, Viking raiders would descend on unsuspecting settlements and camps, their approach masked by the shadows. The sudden eruption of chaos, shouting, flames, and the clash of weapons was utterly disorienting. For those caught in the attack, the inability to see the enemy clearly, to gauge their numbers or predict their next move, turned fear into outright terror. This wasn't just a battle, it was an assault on the mind. One of the most unsettling aspects of these raids was their unpredictability. The Vikings struck when their enemies were most vulnerable during sleep or moments of rest. The psychological toll of being woken by the sounds of an attack, of scrambling to defend yourself in the dark, was immense. It shattered any sense of security, leaving survivors in a state of heightened anxiety. Would they return when the constant threat of another raid turned these attacks into a form of psychological warfare that extended far beyond the battlefield? The Vikings understood that fear could be as effective as a sword. By exploiting the human instinct to dread the unknown, they created a reputation that preceded them. Their raids weren't just about plunder. They were about instilling a deep, lingering fear that made future resistance less likely. This strategy allowed them to dominate with relatively small numbers, as their enemies were often too terrified to fight back effectively. The night raids of the Vikings stand as a stark reminder of how psychological tactics can turn the tide of battle, transforming fear into a weapon more powerful than any blade. Julius Caesar understood that the battlefield wasn't the only place to outmaneuver his enemies. He turned diplomacy into a weapon of psychological warfare. By exploiting the ambitions and rivalries of other leaders, he created a web of shifting alliances that left his opponents questioning who they could truly trust. One of his most cunning moves was to form temporary agreements with rival factions, only to abandon them at the most opportune moment. This strategy wasn't just about gaining tactical advantages, it was about sowing doubt and confusion among his enemies. Consider his dealings with Pompey and the Senate. Caesar initially appeared to seek peace, offering concessions that seemed to foster cooperation. But beneath the surface, he was carefully stoking the flames of division. By playing on the ambitions of Pompey and the Senate, he manipulated them into overextending themselves, believing they had the upper hand. When the time was right, Caesar revealed his true intentions, leaving his former allies scrambling and disoriented. The psychological impact of this betrayal was immense. It shattered trust and left his enemies unsure of their next move. Caesar's use of false alliances extended beyond Rome. In his campaigns in Gaul, he forged agreements with local tribes, only to turn on them once they had served his purpose. This pattern of behavior created a climate of fear and uncertainty. Tribes that might have united against him instead hesitated, fearing they would be the next to be betrayed. Caesar's ability to manipulate perceptions made him a master of psychological warfare, proving that the mind could be just as decisive as the sword. His legacy reminds us that diplomacy, when wielded with cunning, can be a devastating tool in the art of war. The Russian decision to set Moscow ablaze in 1812 remains one of the most dramatic examples of psychological warfare in history. As Napoleon's Grand Army advanced, expecting to claim the city's riches and resources, they were met not with victory but with a horrifying spectacle, a burning capital. The scorched earth policy, implemented by the Russians under Field Marshal Kutuzov, was a desperate yet calculated move. By destroying their own city, they stripped Napoleon of the supplies and shelter his army desperately needed, forcing them into a harsh winter without provisions. But beyond the logistical blow, the psychological impact was devastating. Imagine marching hundreds of miles, enduring countless hardships, only to find the prize you sought engulfed in flames. For Napoleon's soldiers, the sight of Moscow burning was a crushing blow to their morale. It wasn't just a city that was destroyed, it was their sense of purpose. The invaders had been lured deep into enemy territory with the promise of a decisive victory, only to find themselves surrounded by destruction and despair. The psychological toll of this realization was immense. Soldiers who had once been confident and determined now faced the grim reality of a seemingly hopeless campaign. The scorched earth strategy also played on the invaders' fear of the unknown. As the French army pressed forward, they encountered a land stripped bare with no means of sustenance. This deliberate deprivation created a sense of isolation and vulnerability, amplifying the psychological strain. The Russians, though retreating, had turned their desperation into a weapon, using the landscape itself to weaken their enemies' resolve. Napoleon's army, once the most formidable in Europe, found itself crippled not just by hunger and cold, but by the crushing weight of hopelessness. This example shows how psychological warfare can transform even moments of apparent defeat into strategic victories. By sacrificing Moscow, the Russians not only deprived Napoleon of resources, but also shattered the confidence of his forces. The burning city became a symbol of their resilience, a reminder that sometimes the greatest strength lies in the willingness to endure and outlast. It's a lesson in how desperation, when wielded with strategy, can become a powerful tool against even the most formidable opponents. The Spartans were masters of psychological warfare long before the clash of swords began. Picture an army marching toward you, not with the usual clamor of shouts or the clatter of weapons, but in complete silence. This was the Spartan way, a disciplined, unyielding force that moved with such precision and calm that it struck fear into the hearts of their enemies. Their silence wasn't an absence of sound, but a deliberate tactic, a weapon of intimidation. While other armies relied on battle cries to rally their spirits, the Spartans used stillness to unsettle their opponents, creating an atmosphere of dread that lingered long before the first strike. This eerie quiet was a reflection of their unwavering discipline. Spartan warriors were trained from childhood to endure pain, hardship, and fear without flinching. They moved as one, their every step measured and deliberate. To face them was to confront not just an army, but a machine of war, unshakable in its resolve. Their silence conveyed a message. They were not driven by emotion or fear, but by an unbreakable will. This aura of invincibility was as much a psychological weapon as any sword or spear. Imagine standing on a battlefield watching this force approach. There are no taunts, no distractions, just the steady rhythm of their march. The absence of noise amplifies the tension, making every second feel like an eternity. For their enemies, this was a psychological nightmare. The silence forced them to fill the void with their own fears and doubts. Had they already lost? Could they possibly stand against such a formidable foe? The Spartans' composure shattered the confidence of their opponents before the battle even began. This example underscores the power of discipline and control in warfare. The Spartans understood that victory wasn't just about physical strength, it was about breaking the enemy's spirit. By mastering their own emotions and projecting an image of invincibility, they turned their very presence into a weapon. Their silent march was a reminder that sometimes the most powerful force on the battlefield is not the one that screams the loudest, but the one that remains unshaken in the face of chaos. The Aztecs turned sound into a weapon, using the rhythmic pulse of drums to dominate the battlefield. Imagine the scene. As their warriors advanced, the deep, resonant beats of war drums echoed across the landscape, vibrating through the ground and into the bones of their enemies. This wasn't just music, it was a calculated tool of psychological warfare. The relentless rhythm created an atmosphere of inevitability, as if the outcome of the battle had already been decided. For the Aztecs, the drums were a call to action, a way to synchronize their movements and unite their forces. But for their enemies, the sound was unsettling, even paralyzing, as it disrupted concentration and sowed doubt. The psychological impact of this auditory assault was profound. The constant pounding of the drums made it nearly impossible for opposing forces to think clearly or communicate effectively. It was as if the noise invaded their minds, making them question their ability to withstand the impending attack. The Aztecs understood that fear thrives in chaos, and by filling the air with this relentless noise, they turned the battlefield into a place of confusion and terror. The drums didn't just announce their arrival, they declared their dominance. At the same time, these sounds had the opposite effect on the Aztec warriors themselves. The rhythm of the drums became a source of energy and courage, a reminder of their strength and unity. It was a collective heartbeat driving them forward with purpose and resolve. This dual effect, instilling fear in their enemies while emboldening their own forces, made the drums an essential part of Aztec military strategy. They didn't just fight with weapons, they fought with sound, using it to shape the emotional landscape of the battlefield. This example highlights how the Aztecs harnessed the power of auditory manipulation to gain a psychological edge. The drums weren't just background noise, they were a weapon designed to unnerve, disorient, and dominate. By understanding the impact of sound on the human psyche, the Aztecs transformed an ordinary instrument into a tool of war, proving that sometimes the most effective weapons aren't seen or felt, but heard. Joan of Arc transformed belief into a weapon, wielding the power of divine visions to inspire a fractured and demoralized French army. At a time when France was on the brink of defeat during the 100 Years' War, Joan emerged as a figure of extraordinary conviction. She claimed to have been visited by saints who instructed her to lead the French to victory. Her unwavering faith and the authority of these visions gave her a commanding presence that resonated deeply with soldiers and leaders alike. For troops who had endured years of hardship and loss, Joan's message was a beacon of hope, a sign that God was on their side. Her impact on the battlefield was profound. Joan's confidence and sense of divine mission were contagious, lifting the spirits of her troops and instilling in them a renewed sense of purpose. She didn't just offer encouragement, she embodied it, riding into battle with a banner bearing religious symbols and delivering speeches that framed their fight as a holy cause. This psychological shift was crucial. Soldiers who might have once doubted their chances began to believe in their ability to triumph, driven by the conviction that they were acting under God's guidance. The psychological power of perceived divine intervention cannot be overstated. For Joan's army, the idea that their struggle was part of a greater spiritual mission gave them a sense of invincibility. It wasn't just about winning battles, it was about fulfilling a sacred duty. This belief system created a powerful bond among the soldiers, uniting them in a shared purpose that transcended individual fears or doubts. Even in the face of overwhelming odds, the certainty that they were favored by a higher power made them more resilient and determined. Joan's story also highlights the role of leadership in shaping morale. Her charisma and unshakable faith inspired those around her to rise above their limitations. She wasn't a seasoned military commander, but her ability to tap into the spiritual and emotional needs of her troops made her an extraordinary leader. By framing their struggle in religious terms, she gave them a reason to fight that went beyond mere survival or territorial gain. This example underscores the profound influence of belief in warfare. Joan of Arc didn't just bring military strategy to the battlefield. She brought a vision that transformed fear into courage and doubt into resolve. Her legacy is a testament to the power of conviction, showing how the right words delivered with unwavering faith can change the course of history. In the end, it wasn't just about swords and shields. It was about the strength of the human spirit and the belief in something greater than oneself. Masks have long been tools of transformation, and in ancient warfare they became instruments of terror. Warriors across cultures understood that the face of an enemy could be as powerful as their blade. By donning masks that distorted their features or depicted grotesque, inhuman visages, they turned themselves into something far more than mere soldiers. They became monsters. These masks weren't just for show. They were carefully designed to unsettle, to prey on the deepest fears and superstitions of those who faced them. Take the samurai of feudal Japan, for instance. Their helmets, or kabuto, often featured menacing iron masks called mempo, crafted to resemble snarling demons or wrathful gods. These weren't mere decorations, they were psychological weapons. When a samurai charged into battle, the combination of their terrifying mask, the glint of their armor, and their disciplined movements created an aura of invincibility. To their enemies, they appeared not as men but as avatars of destruction, beings beyond mortal comprehension. This unnerving transformation could sow panic, breaking the resolve of even the bravest opponents. Similarly, Celtic warriors of ancient Europe used masks and war paint to alter their appearance, blending the human with the otherworldly. Their faces, painted in stark, swirling patterns, and their masks, often depicting twisted, animalistic features, made them seem like creatures of myth. In the chaos of battle where fear thrives, these warriors became embodiments of the unknown, tapping into the primal dread of facing something that defied understanding. The psychological impact was profound. An enemy who appeared less than human was harder to confront, harder to predict, and harder to defeat. The success of these masks lay in their ability to dehumanize the wearer while amplifying the fears of the observer. In a time when superstition and belief in the supernatural were deeply woven into daily life, the sight of a masked warrior could trigger a cascade of terror. It wasn't just about looking intimidating, it was about creating a narrative. These masks told a story, one where the wearer was no longer bound by the limitations of humanity. They were gods, demons, or spirits, entities that could not be reasoned with or easily vanquished. This psychological tactic also had a secondary effect. It empowered the wearers themselves. By putting on a mask, warriors could shed their individual identities and adopt a persona that was larger than life. It allowed them to channel a sense of invincibility, to distance themselves from the fear and uncertainty of battle. In a way, the masks became shields for the mind, protecting the wearer as much as they terrified the enemy. The use of masks in ancient warfare reveals a universal truth about human psychology. Appearance can be as potent as action. A well-crafted disguise can turn fear into a weapon, transforming the battlefield not just physically but mentally. It's a reminder that warfare has always been as much about perception as it is about strength or strategy. The masks didn't just hide faces, they revealed the power of the mind to shape the course of conflict. Sun Tzu, the ancient Chinese military strategist, didn't just win battles, he mastered the art of winning them before they even began. His seminal work, The Art of War, isn't merely a manual for combat. It's a profound exploration of the human mind and how to manipulate it. At its core, Sun Tzu's philosophy revolves around deception, understanding the enemy, and exploiting their weaknesses. He famously wrote, "All warfare is based on deception," a principle that has echoed through the centuries as a cornerstone of psychological warfare. To Sun Tzu, the battlefield wasn't just a physical space, it was a psychological one, where victory could be achieved by outthinking, not just outfighting, the opponent. One of his most enduring strategies was the concept of appearing weak when strong and strong when weak. This wasn't just about tactics, it was about perception. By feigning vulnerability, an army could lure an overconfident enemy into a trap. Conversely, projecting an image of overwhelming force could paralyze an adversary with fear, making them hesitate or retreat without a single blow being struck. Sun Tzu understood that the mind was as much a target as the body, and that confusion and doubt could be more devastating than any sword or spear. His teachings also emphasized the importance of knowing the enemy, not just their numbers or weapons, but their motivations, fears, and habits. If you know the enemy and know yourself, he wrote, you need not fear the result of 100 battles. This insight into human psychology allowed commanders to anticipate their opponent's moves, exploit their anxieties, and turn their own strengths against them. For example, by spreading misinformation or creating false movements, an army could sow discord and uncertainty, forcing the enemy to second-guess their every decision. The timeless relevance of Sun Tzu's principles is evident in their application far beyond ancient battlefields. Modern military strategists, business leaders, and even athletes have drawn inspiration from his teachings. In World War II, Allied forces employed deception campaigns such as Operation Mincemeat to mislead Axis powers about their plans. In the corporate world, companies use competitive intelligence to outmaneuver rivals, often employing tactics that mirror Sun Tzu's emphasis on understanding the opponent's mindset. Even in sports, coaches study their opponent's tendencies and exploit their weaknesses, showcasing how these ancient strategies remain applicable in diverse arenas. What makes Sun Tzu's approach so enduring is its focus on the intangible aspects of conflict. He recognized that warfare isn't just about brute strength or superior numbers, it's about psychology, strategy, and adaptability. By mastering the art of deception and understanding the enemy's mind, Sun Tzu laid the foundation for psychological tactics that continue to shape the way we think about competition and conflict today. His legacy is a testament to the power of the mind in determining the outcome of any battle, whether it's fought with swords, words, or ideas. 17th example, the use of smoke and mirrors in ancient battles. Ancient armies understood that the chaos of battle could be amplified not just by physical force, but by manipulating perception itself. One of the most striking tactics they employed was the use of smoke and mirrors, literally, to create confusion and sow doubt among their enemies. By harnessing natural elements like smoke from fires or dust kicked up by horses, commanders could obscure their movements, making it nearly impossible for the opposing side to gauge their strength or intentions. This wasn't just about hiding, it was about controlling the narrative of the battlefield. When visibility dropped to near zero, even the most disciplined soldiers could become disoriented, their confidence shaken as they struggled to make sense of the chaos around them. Mirrors, often polished shields or reflective surfaces, added another layer to these psychological tactics. In daylight, armies would angle these devices to reflect sunlight, creating blinding flashes that could disorient and intimidate enemy troops. Imagine standing in formation, only to be suddenly struck by a barrage of dazzling light, momentarily rendering you unable to see or react. This wasn't merely a physical distraction, it was a mental one designed to break focus and instill fear. The unpredictability of these flashes could make soldiers second-guess every step, turning what should have been an orderly advance into a hesitant, disorganized mess. The psychological effects of these tactics were profound. Disorientation breeds uncertainty, and uncertainty erodes morale. An army that can't see its opponent, can't predict its movements, and can't trust its own senses is an army that's already halfway to defeat. Ancient commanders knew this well, and they exploited it to great effect. By transforming the battlefield into a swirling, blinding maze, they forced their enemies to fight not just against them, but against their own fears and doubts. This strategy also had a ripple effect on decision-making. When leaders couldn't accurately assess the situation, their ability to command effectively was compromised. Orders might be delayed, miscommunicated, or abandoned altogether in the face of apparent chaos. Soldiers, left without clear direction, might panic or retreat, assuming the worst even when the reality was far less dire. In this way, smoke and mirrors didn't just obscure the battlefield, they reshaped the entire psychology of the fight, turning what should have been a contest of strength into a test of mental resilience. The legacy of these tactics extends far beyond ancient warfare. Today, the principles of disorientation and misdirection are used in everything from military camouflage to modern marketing strategies. The idea that perception can be manipulated to gain an advantage remains as relevant now as it was thousands of years ago. Whether it's a cloud of smoke on a battlefield or a carefully crafted illusion in a boardroom, the power of confusion and the psychology of uncertainty continue to shape the way we approach conflict and competition. By mastering the art of misdirection, ancient armies laid the groundwork for strategies that still influence us today, proving that sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a sword or a spear, it's the mind itself. The Mongols were masters of psychological warfare, leveraging their fearsome reputation as a weapon to achieve victories without ever drawing a sword. Their strategy was rooted in the power of perception. They understood that an enemy who believed defeat was inevitable was already halfway to surrender. Central to this approach was their ability to project an image of invincibility. Stories of their swift conquests, ruthless efficiency, and overwhelming force spread like wildfire, often reaching enemy cities long before the Mongol armies themselves. This wasn't accidental, it was calculated. By allowing their reputation to precede them, the Mongols turned their legend into a psychological weapon, one that could break the will of their opponents before a single arrow was fired. One of their most effective tactics was the use of terror as a strategic tool. When a city resisted, the Mongols would often respond with overwhelming brutality, leaving no survivors as a stark warning to others. This wasn't merely about punishment, it was about communication. The message was clear: resistance equals annihilation, but surrender offers a chance for survival. This binary choice created a powerful psychological dilemma for their enemies. Faced with the possibility of total destruction, many cities chose to open their gates rather than risk the wrath of the Mongol horde. In this way, the Mongols turned fear into a force multiplier, using it to secure victories with minimal direct combat. Their reputation for speed and unpredictability added another layer to their psychological dominance. The Mongols moved with a pace that seemed almost superhuman, appearing suddenly on the horizon and striking before their enemies could adequately prepare. This created a sense of helplessness among their foes, who often felt they were fighting not just an army, but an unstoppable force of nature. The psychological toll of facing such a relentless adversary was immense. Even well-fortified cities, aware of their walls and resources, could crumble under the weight of this perceived inevitability. What made the Mongol approach particularly effective was its scalability. Whether facing a small village or a vast empire, the principles remained the same: intimidate, demoralize, and dominate. Their reputation wasn't just a byproduct of their success, it was a cornerstone of their strategy. By cultivating an aura of invincibility, they turned their name into a psychological weapon, one that could achieve more than any physical army ever could. The Mongols didn't just win battles, they won the war of perception, proving that sometimes the most powerful force on the battlefield isn't strength or numbers, but the fear that precedes them. The use of animal sounds in ancient warfare might seem unconventional today, but for armies of the past, it was a deliberate and effective psychological tactic. By mimicking the roars of lions, the howls of wolves, or the screeches of unknown creatures, soldiers could tap into primal fears deeply rooted in the human psyche. These sounds weren't just noise, they were weapons of disorientation designed to unsettle and terrify. Imagine standing in the chaos of battle, already on edge, when suddenly the air is split by the bone-chilling cry of a predator you can't see. The effect was immediate and profound. Soldiers, already grappling with the stress of combat, would often interpret these sounds as omens or supernatural warnings, further eroding their morale and focus. This tactic played heavily on superstition and the unknown. In many ancient cultures, animals were seen as symbols of power or messengers from the gods. The roar of a lion wasn't just an animal sound, it was a sign of divine wrath or impending doom. Armies that understood this could weaponize these beliefs, creating an atmosphere of fear that was as potent as any physical assault. For example, the Assyrians were known to use recordings of animal noises during sieges, amplifying the psychological toll on defenders who were already isolated and vulnerable. The combination of unfamiliar sounds and the isolation of a besieged city could break even the strongest wills. The psychological effects of these tactics were multifaceted. On one level, the sudden and unexpected nature of the sounds created confusion, disrupting the enemy's ability to communicate and coordinate. On another level, they triggered a visceral, instinctive fear that bypassed rational thought. This wasn't just about scaring the enemy, it was about destabilizing them, making them question their surroundings and their own senses. In the heat of battle, where split-second decisions could mean the difference between life and death, this kind of disorientation was devastating. What makes this approach particularly fascinating is its simplicity and universality. Unlike elaborate strategies or advanced technology, the use of animal sounds required nothing more than an understanding of human psychology and a bit of creativity. It was a reminder that sometimes the most effective weapons are those that target not the body, but the mind. By harnessing the power of sound and instinct, ancient armies demonstrated an early understanding of psychological warfare, one that continues to resonate in the study of human behavior and conflict. Siege warfare was a slow, grinding form of psychological torture, designed to break not just the walls of a city but the will of its people. Imagine being trapped within a fortress, cut off from the outside world, as the enemy's siege engines loomed ominously in the distance. The constant thud of battering rams, the creak of catapults launching projectiles, and the unrelenting noise of destruction became a daily rhythm, wearing down the defenders' resolve. Over time, the physical strain of hunger and fatigue would merge with the mental anguish of isolation, creating a suffocating atmosphere of despair. This was more than a battle of strength, it was a battle of endurance where time itself became the enemy's ally. The psychological impact of a siege went far beyond the physical suffering. Starvation and disease were formidable foes, but it was the sense of hopelessness that truly shattered spirits. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the defenders would watch their supplies dwindle and their loved ones grow weaker. The sight of the enemy's forces, seemingly unshakable and endlessly patient, reinforced the feeling that escape or relief was impossible. Even the bravest soldiers could be broken by the relentless pressure of knowing that every passing moment brought them closer to defeat. The mind, starved of hope, would often surrender long before the body gave out. Siege engines played a dual role in this psychological warfare. Massive towers, trebuchets, and battering rams weren't just tools of destruction, they were symbols of inevitability. Their sheer size and power sent a clear message: resistance was futile. The defenders, peering over their walls, would see these machines as harbingers of doom, reminders that their fate was sealed. The constant bombardment, whether from arrows, stones, or fire, added to the mental strain. Sleep became a luxury as the defenders were forced to remain vigilant, never knowing when the next attack would come. This unending state of alertness wore down their ability to think clearly, making them more susceptible to fear and panic. The psychological toll of siege warfare reveals a profound truth about human nature. The mind can often be a more vulnerable target than the body. By exploiting the fear of isolation, the agony of waiting, and the crushing weight of inevitability, ancient generals turned time and endurance into weapons. It was a grim reminder that in warfare, the battle for the mind could be just as decisive as the battle on the field. Psychological warfare is as ancient as conflict itself, with its roots stretching back to the earliest civilizations. From the battlefields of Mesopotamia to the strategic campaigns of ancient China, leaders quickly realized that victory wasn't just about physical might, it was about outthinking the enemy. The Assyrians, for example, were masters of fear, using gruesome displays of defeated foes to intimidate their adversaries. They understood that a single image of a broken enemy could spread panic faster than any sword. The Greeks and Romans took psychological tactics to new heights, blending cunning with creativity. The Greeks relied on deception, as seen in the legendary Trojan Horse, a masterstroke of trickery that ended a decade-long stalemate. Meanwhile, the Romans used the power of spectacle to crush morale. Gladiatorial games and public executions weren't just entertainment. They were warnings, reminders to conquered peoples that resistance was futile. In the East, Sun Tzu's The Art of War laid the foundation for psychological strategy. He famously wrote, "All warfare is based on deception," emphasizing the importance of misleading the enemy. Chinese generals often employed feints and false retreats, luring their opponents into traps. Similarly, the Mongols used terror as a weapon, deliberately exaggerating their brutality to convince cities to surrender without a fight. Across cultures and eras, certain principles remained constant. Fear was a universal tool, whether it was the dread of an approaching army or the terror of the unknown. Deception, too, was a recurring theme, with leaders using misinformation to confuse and misdirect, and morale, both their own and their enemies, was always a critical factor. By shattering the enemy's spirit, armies could achieve victory without ever engaging in direct combat. These timeless strategies reveal a profound truth about human nature. The battlefield is as much a mental arena as a physical one. From the earliest sieges to the grand campaigns of antiquity, psychological warfare has shaped the course of history, proving that the mind can be the most powerful weapon of all. The Battle of Cannae stands as one of the most devastating examples of psychological warfare in ancient history, a masterstroke orchestrated by the brilliant Carthaginian general Hannibal. Facing a Roman army far larger than his own, Hannibal didn't rely on brute force alone. He exploited the psychology of his enemy. The Romans, confident in their superior numbers and disciplined formations, marched into the trap with an air of invincibility. Hannibal, however, knew their overconfidence could be turned against them. He arranged his forces in a crescent shape, deliberately weakening the center to lure the Romans in. As the legions pressed forward, eager to break through what seemed like a faltering line, they unknowingly marched into a carefully designed encirclement. Hannibal's flanking forces closed in, creating a sense of inevitability as the Romans found themselves surrounded on all sides. The very confidence that had driven them forward now became their undoing as panic set in and their formations crumbled. The psychological impact of this defeat was catastrophic for Rome. Tens of thousands of soldiers were killed in a single day, a loss that shook the Republic to its core. The Romans, who had prided themselves on their military prowess, were left reeling from the realization that their might could be so easily outmaneuvered. Hannibal's victory wasn't just a physical blow, it was a mental one, sowing doubt and fear throughout the empire. For years after Cannae, the specter of Hannibal loomed large in the Roman psyche. Leaders hesitated to engage him directly, and the public grew anxious about the future of their republic. This psychological shadow influenced Roman strategy for decades, forcing them to adapt their tactics and rethink their approach to warfare. Hannibal's genius lay not just in his ability to win battles, but in his understanding of how to shatter the enemy's spirit, leaving a legacy of fear that outlasted his campaigns. Cannae remains a timeless lesson in the power of psychological manipulation. It shows how a deeper understanding of the enemy's mindset can transform a seemingly unwinnable situation into a decisive victory. Hannibal's brilliance wasn't just in his tactics, it was in his ability to see the battlefield as a chessboard, where the mind was as important as the sword. Fear has always been one of the most potent tools in the arsenal of ancient warfare, a psychological weapon capable of crippling even the most disciplined armies. Imagine standing on the battlefield, hearing the deafening war cries of an advancing enemy echoing across the field. These sounds weren't just noise, they were carefully crafted to instill terror, a primal fear that could unravel the resolve of even the bravest soldiers. The Assyrians, for example, were masters of this tactic, using guttural chants and rhythmic drumming to create an atmosphere of dread before the first blow was struck. But it wasn't just sound that could weaponize fear. Visual displays of brutality were equally effective. Ancient commanders often used public executions or mutilations of prisoners to send a clear message to their enemies. The Mongols under Genghis Khan were particularly infamous for this. By displaying the severed heads of their foes or leaving their mutilated bodies in plain sight, they created a chilling narrative of invincibility. The goal wasn't just to punish, it was to paralyze the enemy with the fear of what awaited them if they resisted. This use of fear wasn't merely about intimidation, it had a strategic purpose. Fear can cloud judgment, disrupt coordination, and weaken morale. A terrified soldier is less likely to follow orders, more prone to panic, and quicker to flee. In this way, fear became a multiplier, amplifying the effectiveness of smaller forces and turning the tide of battles before they even began. However, the ethical implications of this tactic are deeply troubling. While fear may have been effective, it came at a high cost, both to the individuals who suffered and to the societies that normalized such brutality. The psychological scars left by these practices often lingered long after the battles ended, shaping the collective memory of entire cultures. Reflecting on the use of fear in ancient warfare forces us to confront the darker side of human ingenuity. It's a reminder that victory on the battlefield often came at the expense of humanity, raising questions about the true cost of psychological manipulation. While fear may have been a tool of the past, its legacy continues to challenge us to consider the moral boundaries of conflict and the enduring impact of psychological warfare. The presence of a leader on the battlefield could make the difference between victory and defeat, not just through strategy but through the sheer force of their personality. Leaders who understood the art of inspiring their troops wielded psychological power that often turned the tide of war. Take Alexander the Great, for instance, who rode at the front of his army, sharing every hardship with his soldiers. His courage and charisma created an unbreakable bond, motivating his men to follow him into even the most perilous situations. But leadership wasn't always about inspiration, sometimes it was about intimidation. Hannibal Barca, the Carthaginian general, was known for his stern discipline and unyielding authority. By demanding absolute loyalty and punishing disobedience swiftly, he instilled a sense of fear and respect that kept his army cohesive even during their arduous march across the Alps. While his approach differed from Alexander's, the result was the same: a tightly controlled, psychologically unified fighting force. The psychological impact of leadership extended beyond the battlefield. A strong leader could transform the very identity of their army, fostering a sense of purpose and camaraderie. Julius Caesar, for example, was a master of this. He often addressed his soldiers directly, emphasizing their shared destiny and the glory they would achieve together. His words didn't just rally his men, they created a collective belief in their invincibility, a mindset that carried them through countless campaigns. Yet leadership wasn't solely about charisma or discipline, it was also about perception. Leaders who appeared invulnerable or larger than life could inspire awe and fear in equal measure. Genghis Khan cultivated an image of almost supernatural power, spreading tales of his divine mandate to rule. This aura of inevitability demoralized his enemies and emboldened his followers, making them believe they were part of something unstoppable. The psychological effects of leadership often had tangible outcomes. Armies led by inspiring or intimidating commanders fought harder, held formations longer, and recovered more quickly from setbacks. This intangible edge could outweigh numerical superiority or tactical advantages, proving that the human element in warfare was just as critical as physical resources. Examining the role of leadership in ancient battles reminds us that war is as much a test of the mind as it is of the body. The ability to inspire, intimidate, or unite an army was a skill that could reshape history, leaving a legacy far beyond the battlefield. These leaders didn't just command armies, they shaped the very psychology of warfare, proving that the greatest weapon in any campaign was often the person leading it. From the deceptive strategies of the Trojan Horse to the awe-inspiring presence of Genghis Khan, these 20 examples of psychological warfare reveal just how much the human mind shaped the outcomes of ancient battles. Each tactic, whether through fear, deception, or inspiration, demonstrates a profound understanding of human psychology, proving that victory often hinged not on brute force, but on the ability to outthink and outmaneuver the enemy. These ancient leaders and armies didn't just fight with swords and shields, they fought with ideas, perceptions, and carefully crafted illusions that left their adversaries reeling. What makes these strategies so remarkable is their timelessness, the principles behind them: understanding your enemy, leveraging perception, and manipulating morale are as relevant today as they were thousands of years ago. Modern leaders, whether in business, politics, or even everyday life, can learn from these ancient masters of psychology. The ability to inspire, intimidate, or outwit remains a powerful tool in navigating challenges and achieving success. But perhaps the most fascinating takeaway is how these tactics remind us that conflict is as much a battle of minds as it is of physical resources. Even in an age of advanced technology, human psychology continues to play a pivotal role in shaping outcomes. The stories of these ancient armies challenge us to think differently about how we approach obstacles, encouraging us to consider the psychological dimensions of every challenge we face. As we reflect on these ingenious strategies, it's clear that history offers more than just tales of conquest. It provides lessons in creativity, adaptability, and the enduring power of the human spirit. So, what do you think? How do you see these ancient tactics influencing the world today? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this deep dive into history's most fascinating mysteries, don't forget to subscribe for more. Together, let's keep exploring the stories that shaped our world.